All right, folks, good afternoon. Welcome to the last day of a TechEd Europe. How is everybody doing? Tired, excited, or like me, still jet-lagged? Who's ready for the weekend? All right, same here. Before we start, I would really like to thank you for coming over to the session. Believe it or not, as late as this hour in a Friday afternoon, I checked the schedule last night. At the same time slot, there are actually 21 breakout sessions. So the fact that you are here, you decided to come into this room and listen to this session, tells us nothing but your interest as well as your trust to Microsoft private cloud solution, IaaS stack, right? So thank you for coming over. Quick self-introduction. My name is Cheng. I'm a program manager in Virtual Machine Manager product team in System Center. And standing right by me, her name is Vaibhava.
Hi everyone, I'm Vaibhava Ramadas, and I'm a program manager on the Windows Azure Pack.
So first, before we start entering the session, can we do a quick survey? I'm going to ask 4 questions, and as you hear my question, if the answer is yes, would you please raise up your hands? So first question, how many people have tested or installed Virtual Machine Manager 2012 SP1, the previous release? All right, good. Please keep your hand up, please. For the people who install VMM, how many of you have installed SPF? Only a couple left. And out of the remaining people, how many of you installed Windows Azure Services for Windows Server? You installed that as well. Have you made end-to-end work, the integration for the entire stack? Somewhat.
Okay.
So actually, this is now very surprising to me, right? And hopefully that's the reason why we're here today, and hopefully that's also the reason why you are here today. You know, without deep understanding of all the ins and outs of each component within the stack, without a deep solid understanding about the integration points across the components, sometimes it can be intimidating to think about how do I integrate the whole solution stack together and make it a private cloud solution. And I like the cartoon in the sense that people call it just magic, it should work. But in reality, we have find our customers been telling us before they can even try out the full stack, their concerns are, is it really hard to do it? Do I have to hire a consultant to help me set this up? And how does each component work together? Hence, that's why today, the main goal of this session, what we'll be doing for the next 71 minutes, is we're going to walk you through the IaaS solution from Microsoft from an architecture point of view. But the majority of the time, hopefully within roughly about 60 minutes of time, we're going to spending on walking you through the process of how do you configure each of the components, namely VMM, SPF, and Windows Azure Pack, and make that work end to end. And we're going to show you how to actually set this whole thing up within an hour. So hopefully by end of this session, you will be able to go back and be able to do the same thing within a day. So let's get started. I'd like to quickly review the Microsoft IaaS solution architecture. Now, if you have been to keynotes and foundational sessions and probably some other System Center sessions, this diagram is probably you've seen it multiple times. So I'm not going to repeat the message that we've seen. But the key thing I'd like to highlight is the fact that Microsoft's strategy is really multi-cloud strategy, right? Regardless it's Windows Azure or the private cloud IaaS solution in your own data center, or it's a hosted solution, the experience, the API layer is all consistent. We believe it's important. Why is it important? Because we believe it is important to give people the freedom of choice wherever you as customer decide to put your workload, right? In public cloud, private cloud, or hosted cloud, you should have the choice to deploy wherever you want and have the ability and the agility to migrate the workload or deploy workload on demand. So with Microsoft's solution, you can do this. We believe we have this definitely a competitive advantage in the industry to offer the solution like this. Now today's session, this specific session, we're going to focus on primarily around the private cloud. So specifically enterprise customers or service provider hosters would benefit probably more. Now, what you're looking at this diagram is you've probably seen that a couple of times as well, but I think it's important to dive a little bit deeper down to see what do we mean by the consistent platform. On the left-hand side, what you're seeing there is Windows Azure architecture. The bottom part, Windows Azure, the blue color one, really is the fabric. And what's important to highlight here is the fabric is actually running Windows Server, right? The same Windows Server that you will have in your own data center or in the hosted data center. And it's also running Hyper-V, 100% Hyper-V, right? And on top of the fabric, there's a set of services that we're hosting. And the API, the Service Management API, previously also known as Red Dot Frontend, RDFE, it's supporting not only the portal, the self-service portal experience that you're seeing from Windows Azure, but also its interface allows developers to directly program against Windows Azure various services. So compared with Windows Azure, if you look at the private cloud solution, right, on the bottom of the stack, which is also our fabric layer, it runs the same Windows Server, right, with Hyper-V. And System Center product suite essentially is the fabric controller sitting on top of the compute and storage and fabric and networking fabrics. And we slide over the Service Management API directly into the private cloud in the sense that you have consistent, identical API interfaces between the public cloud and the private cloud solution. Not only that, right, as you can see that even the self-service experience is identical to Windows Azure. And on top of that, we also created a provider portal, which is essentially the admin portal to allow users to go in and creating plans, managing users, and doing other management activities through the provider portal. Right, so, and once you have the same infrastructure set up, we start enabling various services. And through our learning from large-scale, high-density, high-volume Windows Azure services experience, we can enable those services in your private cloud environment as well. Now, today we have websites, IaaS, VM, SQL, and Service Bus. Tomorrow there's more investment coming in. So that's what we mean by consistent experience. Now, next, when we talk about how do you enable an IaaS solution, probably the first thing you will talk about with your CTOs, CIOs, or maybe your director of IT is, how do I design a private cloud in my environment, right? And I like to use this whiteboard drawing to show, the typical discussion that probably will happen in your company when you talk about private cloud. The first thing has to happen is you need to have a set of compute nodes, right? Where your Hyper-V host is going to be running. And obviously, beneath the compute nodes, you need to have storage, regardless of direct attached disk attached to your Hyper-V host, or maybe it's fiber channel SAN, iSCSI SAN, or it could be the latest Windows scale-out file server and backed by a bunch of JBODs. In regards to what you do, you need to design and lay down your foundation for storage fabric and compute fabric. We highly recommend that you cluster all the Hyper-V hosts to ensure that all the VMs created on those hosts will automatically have the high availability. After the compute and storage fabric is defined, the next thing you need to figure out is how your network layout is going to look like, right? So this including your IP management, what IP pools you want to use, is that DHCP or static IP, and your logical networks, your network segments, your subnet, your VLANs, as well as your virtual switch. Once you define your compute fabric, storage fabric, and networking fabric, the next thing you do is you pull the resources into a resource pool. At this point, you can define cloud, and then delegate specific clouds to a specific target audience. Right? In hosters environment, this would be your targeted tenants. In enterprise environment, this could be your different product groups or different business group that your IT department is servicing. And once you define all these, essentially you will have a private cloud solution. Now, Microsoft solution doesn't really stop there. We also allow you to extend your capacity to external clouds, right? In the sense that you can use, for example, our network gateway to connect to maybe a hoster cloud from your enterprise cloud in case you need additional capacity that your enterprise cloud doesn't have capacity for, right? So this is kind of the high-level whiteboard drawing type of architecture. Now, once you have that, the next thing probably you need to consider is the hardware. So let's talk about the hardware. Again, in Microsoft, what we believe is more a model-driven design model. What do I mean by that is you want your applications and maybe even your architecture, the hardware architecture, to be as consistent as much as possible. And the reason for that is it's not only will reduce the operational cost, but also ensures a higher agility when you think about scaling out or scale up your infrastructure, right? So what do we call by a stamp? Essentially, it's a scale, it's a unit of compute, networking, and storage resources that are managed by a single instance of VMM. That's what we call a stamp. And let's take a look at what does a stamp look like. Today, in Virtual Machine Manager, one instance of VMM can manage up to 25,000 VMs and 1,000 hosts. Once you reach to that boundary, then you want to consider adding additional stamp. In addition to that, there may be other scenarios where multiple stamps is necessary. For example, you may have a primary site stamp, and you may have a backup and recovery stamp. You may have one stamp in, let's say, Madrid, and maybe another stamp in London, right? Depends on your business needs, you may have different kind of stamp. But each stamp, what does it contain is on the first rack, you will have a management unit. That's essentially a dedicated hardware hosting all the management services, including VMM, Operations Manager, SPF, Windows Azure Pack, et cetera, et cetera. And you have edge components. The edge component essentially is a set of devices or workloads that are running to support your network domain, the network fabric. That can include your top-of-rack switch, your aggregation switch, maybe your network virtualization gateway. And the compute node is straightforward. Those are just Hyper-V hosts, right? And the bottom of the storage is, depends on what storage solution you have, regardless to SAN or file server or just JBOD. Now, once you have the first rack set up, the second rack and the third and the fourth will be identical in the sense that it'll only have the network segment, the compute segment, and the storage segment. And again, this goes back to the model method that once you have defined a model, a consistent hardware layout, it'll become easier for you to replicate, to repeat the process, and to scale out. All right, so that's kind of the hardware design. Now, on the network topology, we mentioned also you need to make sure that when you're planning for a private cloud solution, make sure to design your networking up front. It's not just about the IP address space management, not just about the VLAN management, but maybe more importantly is security concerns, right? What kind of corporate policy you have in your corporate enterprise environment or in the hoster's environment that you need to adhere to. When you're designing a network topology, this is kind of the rough, high-level network topology we recommend. If you're designing a completely intranet or private cloud solution, there's no need to go out to the internet. Maybe the public internet and the firewall is not necessary, but everything else is roughly kind of the topology we would recommend. Additionally, one thing to highlight is we highly recommend that you use network virtualization for tenant networks because that offers just so much flexibility and ease of management, right? I'm not going to go into the details about how you manage your network, but I highly recommend you to take a look at some of the sessions that has gone through the TechEd. I believe Greg has 2 sessions around networking. Highly recommend you to take a look at the session to get yourself familiar with how to manage network within System Center. All right, so I'm going to move on to how do we configure the whole stack end to end. Now, before I move on to configuration, I want to make sure we're all on the same page as to what are the prerequisites that you need to finish or complete before you move on to the configuration phase. The first thing, obviously, make sure you have a solid plan around your compute fabric, storage fabric, and network fabric, right? Design layout, domain-wise, security-wise, those things settle down. Secondly, obviously, you have to download the software, run the setup, right? And then install the products. And this is where our demo is going to begin. So we're going to assume that you have the product downloaded, installed on the box, ready to go for configuration. And lastly, obviously, you need to have some sort of fabric resources for you to create VMs on. Regardless of the proof of concept, testing environment, or production environment, you better have some fabric resource for testing. So with that, this is the next level detail we're going to show you for the IaaS cloud architecture. Right? At the very bottom, again, it's a VMM managing your fabric resources and VMM server. So there we have in this diagram we have two stamps, but each stamp VMM server will be managing a set of resources, and we'll be creating clouds and clubbing resources into resource group and creating clouds in the VMM server. On top of VMM, there is a layer of SPF. SPF essentially provides the multi-tenant RESTful data layer API to Windows Azure Pack. And on top of SPF, Windows Azure Pack essentially consists of two major components, Service Management API and Service Management Portal. And Vaibhava, in just probably a few minutes, she'll be walking you through the details about Windows Azure Pack. And on top of that, obviously, you have either tenant or self-service user in your enterprise environment. So this is the architecture we'll be referring back quite frequently next. And we're going to walk you through to say where we're going to stop to talk about the configuration in the stack, so you know where we are. And when we talk about how easy or difficult the configuration really is, as you really look down, what needs to be accomplished to enable this end-to-end integration. And when we sit down and think through that, really there are just 6 steps, or you can call that 6 stages, right? The first step is to configure the fabric in VMM. Second step is to create a cloud in VMM. The third step is to create account or configuration account in SPF. Remember, SPF is a thin layer. It connects between VMM and Windows Azure Pack. So the authentication is important there. The fourth step and fifth and sixth step is configuring the Windows Azure Pack. Okay, so it's actually quite simple, only 6 steps, and we're going to walk you through every single one of them. And by the way, the steps are also color-coded based on where the configuration needs to happen. Right? The green ones means VMM, the blue ones means SPF, and the purple ones means Windows Azure Pack. All right, so let's look at first within VMM, what needs to happen there. Now, before we go into the configuration steps, I'd like to point out some of the multi-tenancy features that we have implemented within VMM to help make this happen. Right? From the bottom up, from a connectivity point of view, VMM offers VM networks that's multi-tenancy support, that's supporting multi-tenancy, network isolation, which is very critical for multi-tenancy. On the identity front, on behalf of support, which means that SPF server can connect to VMM as an admin of VMM. However, you can also present tenant user or self-service user on behalf of that, which is very important to support multi-tenancy. Access control and share resource pools, those are existing features even before VMM 2012 SP1. Now, the 2 steps in VMM, we're going to walk through in the main detail. So step-by-step configuration. When we say configuring fabric, what do we mean by that? Again, going back to the resource types that VMM manage, right? Compute resources, storage resources, networking resources. In the demo, what we're going to show you is we don't really have storage fabric. In a sense, we use directly attached storage. So that step will be skipped in our demo. But in your environment, you need to plan for that. For compute resources, you can either add existing Windows Server as Hyper-V host, or you can create Hyper-V host from bare metal. Networking resources, what we really mean is registering those networking resources with VMM so we can manage them. Regardless it's IP address pools, subnets, VLANs, logical networks, or it might be your load balancers that you need to register with VMM. The second step is cloud creation or configuration. Once you define those resources, pull them into cloud, and then creating additional templates and profiles that will be used by Windows Azure Pack. And the third step, configuring SPF account permission. That's also important, which allows SPF service account be able to access VMM, talk to VMM on behalf, in the context of VMM admin. Obviously, at the end, you want to test that. This is actually a little cheat sheet that I find useful to myself. I want to share that with you as well. When you're configuring the network, what needs to happen, make sure that those critical things are checked off. You can look it up after this presentation as well. But these are the things that need to happen. I'll show you all these things in the demo. All right, so let me jump to my demo box. All right. So, oops, let me log in. In the console you're looking at, this is VMM 2012 R2 preview release. As you can see in the fabric view, we have really there's no host at all. It's almost equivalent to what you would see when you just install VMM on a empty environment. And so what I'll do first is I'm going to add a host. What I'll do is I'll just go ahead and click the Add Resource button and select Host, Hyper-V host, and cluster. And as you can see, there's multiple options where I can use. In this demo, I'm only going to show adding hosts in a trusted domain. But VMM also support adding hosts in various different trust domains, as well as allowing add hosts from bare metal. So in this case, I'm going to select adding Hyper-V host in a trusted domain. I'm going to select this run as account, and I'm going to type in the computer name. One thing to note is this search box, actually we use wildcard search. Even if you only know partially the host name, we should be able to find them. And they'll all show up in this list. In this case, I'll select this computer as my host. And I'm going to select using all default values. And there you go. And that's the process of how you add a Hyper-V host. So while the job is running on the background, let me switch over to the networking view. Because remember, we need to configure the fabric, right? By adding host, I'm essentially adding compute resources into VMM. Next, we need to define and configure our network fabric. So if you click on I'm click on the logical network node. As you can see, there's nothing there. So we're going to go ahead and create a logical network. Let's name that as TechEd Europe Demo 01. And I'm going to add a site. And this site will apply to all hosts. We'll use VLAN 0 for this site. I'm going to call this site as Madrid. And that's it. So the logical network is created, as showing up here. As soon as that's done, I'm going to switch over to VMs and services view. I'm going to create a VM networks. Let's call that TechEd Europe VM network. 01. As you can see, it's already pre-populated with this logical network we just created, because right now in the database, there's only one logical network. So I'm going to select next. It's very straightforward and simple. So that one is also done. Now we have just created a logical network and a VM network that is associated with the logical network. Okay? And once that's done, I'm going to switch back to the Fabric view. I'm going to go into the port profile, and I'm going to create a uplink port profile. And the reason I'm doing this is that I need to create a logical switch. In order for me to create a logical switch, I must have a valid uplink port profile, because the logical switch needs to attach to uplink port, otherwise it wouldn't be valid. So let's go ahead and create a uplink port profile. Let's call that TechEd Europe uplink port profile 01. And there's two options. Obviously, you can create a regular port profile or uplink port profile. In our case, we're going to create an uplink port profile right here. And notice that I'm going to use default settings for load balancing algorithms as well as teaming mode. When you have a complex networking environment, you may select different load balancing algorithm as well as different teaming mode. But in this demo, we're going to keep things simple. And we need to select a site, which is the Madrid site that we created when we were creating the logical network, right? And next, finish. Again, fairly straightforward. And there we go. We should have our uplink port profile created right here. Now, on the networking fabric configuration, the last thing I need to do is to create a logical switch, right? And let's go ahead and click on Create Logical Switch. Let's give it a name as TechEd Europe Logical Switch 01. And I'm going to keep the default extensions for this logical switch. For the uplink port profile, we need to add this TechEd Europe uplink port profile 01 that we just created. Hit OK. And next, since this is uplink port profile, we're not creating any special virtual ports. So I'm going to skip this page, keep everything as default as well. And that's it. There we have our first logical switch. So let me switch back to the server view, see if the host has been added. Yes, so the host, remember the mark U-WS 2012, the host that we added at the beginning of the demo session, now is added and it's responding. So just to review quickly, because I've done quite a few things, I want to make sure we're all on the same page as what I'm doing. What I've done is I added the host into VMM. That process is considered configuring your fabric, right? You can obviously add more than one host. More than likely, you'll have clusters to be added into VMM. Same process, okay? The next thing I did was I created a logical network, a VM network mapping to the logical network, right? Why am I doing that? Because I need to set up my networking fabric. And the next thing I did is I created an uplink port profile, and I created a logical switch, and I attached the uplink port profile to the logical switch. Why do I need to do that? Because I need to create a logical network fabric. This fabric is going to go across my host. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this logical switch to the host that I just added. So how do I do that? Is going to the host property and going to the virtual switch node. Right now, as you can see, it's empty. There's no virtual switch. By the way, we can also jump over to the actual host computer. This is the Mark U-WS 2012 computer that we added. Right? This is the Hyper-V Manager UI for that host. And if I click on the virtual switch manager, as you can see here, the virtual switch is empty. There's no virtual switch currently on that host, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to VMM's console, go to VMM's UI, and hit New Virtual Switch, New Logical Switch. By default, because this is the only logical switch we have, so we're going to use this. And notice that it automatically mapped to this uplink port profile. This uplink port profile we created with the logical switch. One thing to note is you need to add a virtual NIC when you are adding the logical switch to the host. Because once you create a virtual switch, the NIC will no longer be available serving as a dedicated network adapter because it'll serve as a switch. So without creating a virtual NIC, you may actually lose your network connectivity. We're going to give it a name just to say management NIC. Hit OK. Yes, it actually gave you the warning to make sure that you do that as well. And what VMM is doing right now is talking to the host, making a bunch of WMI calls to say, now create this virtual switch for me with this set of attributes, with this set of uplink port profile attributes, with this set of policies defined by VMM. And it also create a virtual NIC to represent to capture the current host NIC setting. When this is done, we can go to the Hyper-V host, and you will be able to see that that virtual switch will be created. It's probably still going through the process. I may actually temporarily lose connectivity because it's going through creating a virtual switch and creating a virtual NIC on top of the host, and then reattach the IP settings from the physical NIC to the virtual NIC. It's going to come back. So let's switch back to the VMM console. So just to quickly review what we've done, we've configured the compute fabric by adding host. We configured the networking fabric by creating logical networks, VM networks, logical switch, right? We attached the logical switch to the host. The next thing we need to do, because we don't have any storage to manage in this demo environment, so we skip that. The next thing we're going to do is to set the SPF service account, add that into VMM, making that as one of the VMM's administrator. And we'll come back to the host. I'll show you the settings. So how do you do that is you go to settings. You go to settings on VMM console, and you go to the node, security node, user rows, and there's an administrator row. And what you do is you go to the members tab, right? And then you click on add. In this case, because I know I set up SPF by using this account, by using SPF SVC account. Hit OK. And as you can see, this last user row, the last user added into as part of the VMM's admin group has been added. And hit OK. And that's it. So let's switch back to the host to see if the host is back online now or not. Okay. So this is the Hyper-V host, again, that we added into VMM. We also attached the logical switch to it. There you go. So that logical switch has been created with the TechEd Europe logical switch 01, right? All right, so just to quickly review what we have done. So we've configured the compute fabric. We configured the network fabric. We set up the SPF's account to make sure that SPF service account is part of VMM's admin group. And that's all you need to do to set up the cloud end-to-end for VMM components. So let me switch back to the deck. So we set up VMM for the cloud, for the IaaS architecture, the entire stack. Next, let's look at SPF, right? What really SPF is, it's just a thin layer of OData RESTful API that's sitting on top of VMM. And it provides multi-tenancy support. It also supports aggregation or federation of VMM instances, in the sense that one SPF can manage 1 to 5 VMM instances, right? And it exposes the VM management, service template management, VM network management capability of VMM through that OData layer. It also integrates with Orchestrator for any automation needs. There's a bunch of other features. I'm not going to read through that, but that's essentially the main purpose for SPF. Now, in the IaaS stack, right in the middle, that's SPF. Okay, and one thing to highlight is again, it's a bridging point where it bridges between the Windows Azure Pack and the VMM. And that's why it's important. The account configuration, is important in SPF. Now we have just done the configuration of adding SPF service account into VMM as the admin. And the next thing we're going to see is how do I enable Windows Azure Pack to talk to SPF. So configure account in SPF. And here are the few things that you need to be aware when you're doing this. Number one is app pool. So if you look at the SPF, in a moment I'll show you, there are 4 essential app pool services running SPF. And make sure that you use a domain user account. You cannot use network service account. Has to be domain user account. And when you specify a domain user account, make sure you log into SPF server by using the domain user account at least once. There's some glitches that we have, we have discovered that for the user account to be fully functional, certain profiles has to be set up on SPF server. And the other thing you probably need to be aware is by default IaaS W3WP recycles itself every 29 hours. So we highly recommend you set up HA, more than one instance of SPF, so that not only you get the scalability, but also you have the highly available capability as well. On the connection or integration with Windows Azure Pack side, Windows Azure Pack needs a local user account. So the credential that you need for SPF to talk to Windows Azure Pack needs to be a local user account. Cannot be a domain join account. And in a moment I'll show you that we have to create a local user account and give that information to Windows Azure Pack for Windows Azure Pack to configure the authentication with SPF. Lastly, this is a very common confusion that we have heard from customers that yes, you can create tenant accounts in VMM or in SPF without going through Windows Azure Pack. But when you do that, those self-service accounts won't show up on Windows Azure Pack. When you go to the portal or talking through the API, you won't see those accounts because those accounts were not created by Windows Azure Pack. So make sure if you want to create some self-service account or tenant user account, it has to go through Windows Azure Pack. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. And with that, I'm going to show you how to configure SPF. This part is actually quite straightforward. Let me switch back to my demo machine. And we're going to go to SPF demo machine. Enter the password. So this is my SPF machine. For the demo purpose, I only have one instance of SPF. As you can see on the IaaS app pool, we have under the Redmond SPF service account, there are 4 app pool services running under this credential. And it is the same credential that I added into VMM as the VMM admin, if you still remember from that demo. So that's one thing. The next thing I'm going to show you is on the computer management. If you look at the users, there is this local user account that I have already created, SPF users. This is the local user that we're going to use for Windows Azure Pack to connect to SPF. Okay. And once this local user account is created, you also need to make sure that in the groups view, there's 4 groups that created for SPF. all these 4 groups needs to have that local user account that we created being added into those 4 groups, so that this local user will have privilege to connect, communicate, and send requests to SPF. Let's just open up one of those groups and take a look. There, so the SPF user, the local user account, as you can see, is listed inside of that group. Same thing is true for all the other 3. So really, I mean, that's all you need to do for SPF. Again, the configuration on SPF side is really, really simple, right? Again, as I was mentioning before, it's all about setting up the account, making sure the proper privilege is assigned for the user. There are 2 main users. One user, SPF use to communicate with VMM, which is the service account running for those SPF services, right? That user needs to be added in VMM's admin group. And the other user is the local account user that we need to create an SPF server. That user, local user, will be used by Windows Azure Pack communicated with the SPF. And that's all you need to do. And that concludes my demo for SPF. So I'm going to switch back to the slide deck. And next, Vaibhava is going to walk us through the configuration step needed for Windows Azure Pack.
Okay, can everyone hear me? All good? Okay, just before I start though, just to know, how many of you have heard of the Windows Azure Pack before like this session? Okay, is this in the keynote? Have you had a chance to attend any more detailed sessions? Okay, so I'll go a little bit into the concepts then, so we don't miss out. Okay, so we saw this slide, and Chung presented this to us. So here there are basically 3 main levels that are represented. So you have the management portal tier, you have the service management API tier, and then you have the fabric or the resource provider or service tier as we call it. In this case, since we're going mainly into IaaS, this tier is represented by VMM and SPF, which is the provider that offers us the IaaS experience. In the service management API tier, you have 3 distinct components. You have the service management admin API, the tenant API, and the public endpoint, which we also refer to as the tenant public API. Now, the differences between these 3 things are that the service admin API really allows you to do admin level infrastructure management operations, like adding a cloud and then maintaining the infrastructure. The tenant API allows you to do more tenant-level functions, like creation of subscriptions, and then creation of VMs, etc. The public endpoint is actually a very interesting one because it allows you to put the tenant public endpoint on the internet for tenant access directly into the API. So once the tenants have a subscription, they can go in and create resources like VMs and maintain those resources. Now, in the management portal tier of this diagram, we have 2 distinct parts. We have the service admin portal and then the tenant portal. Now, the service admin portal really allows, again, the administrator to go in and maintain his infrastructure. Most of the calls for the service admin portal go into the service admin API. The next one there is the tenant portal, which again allows the user to go in, create their accounts, and this user is a tenant or a self-service user who goes in, creates a subscription, and then is able to create tenant-level resources like their VMs and then maintain their VMs. Now, there are certain key concepts that we use within the Windows Azure Pack, so I want to make sure that I go over them so that when I refer to them later, we're all on the same page. The first one is a resource provider. What is a resource provider? It is a REST API-driven interface that really allows you to create and maintain your resources. Some examples of resources are the VMs, you have websites, databases, we also have service bus. Plans. Now, plans is really just a collection of these services or resource providers, and it also allows you to put quotas or limits on those resource providers. Take an example of a plan. You could have a gold plan that runs on your really good infrastructure, and you could have a bronze plan that runs on your commodity hardware. Now, the gold plan could also allow you to make, say, 10 VMs and 5 websites, and a bronze plan allows you to make 2 VMs and 2 websites. That's an example for you. A plan is really just a template, and with a plan, users can then create subscriptions and get access to those plans. Now, who is a user? A user is simply a person who's able to log on to the portal and get or buy a subscription that is an instance of a plan. Now, the user identities in V1, that is in Windows Azure Services for Windows Server, the users were mainly a part of this membership provider, which is the ASP.NET membership provider. But with Windows Azure Pack, we've also introduced the ability to use AD, so it's more enterprise focused, as well as you can actually use a lot of identity providers that can federate through ADFS. Subscriptions. A subscription really is a unique ID that identifies a self-service user or a tenant within the whole Windows Azure Pack system. A subscription allows a tenant or a self-service user to create and maintain these VMs. It recognizes them throughout the system. It allows you to create resources and maintain them, and it also distinctly recognizes the quotas or limits that are applied to that particular subscription. It is also an important billing entity because the usage that you have for these resources gets tied back to your subscription. So the person who bills you, the service provider can bill the subscription for the exact utilization of that resource. An add-on. An add-on is a new concept that we had as part of the Windows Azure Pack, this particular version. The add-on really allows you to add resources to an existing subscription. So if I have a subscription that allows me to create 10 VMs and 5 websites, I can now buy an add-on that gives me the ability to create 2 more VMs attached to my subscription. So are we good with these concepts? OK, let me move on. So we saw this diagram up front. I am going to be kind of taking you through steps 4, 5, and 6. OK, so we saw steps 1 and 2 that Chung took us through. We configured the fabric in VMM, and we created a cloud. And we created the templates and the hardware profiles. Next, he configured accounts in SPF, and then those accounts turn up in the database. And now we have, as a prerequisite, a deployment of the service management API and the portals. And what I am going to show you next in the demo is, 1, how do you connect SPF up to the Windows Azure Pack via the admin portal and through the service management API. Next, I'll show you how we create a plan on the service admin portal, and how we then, as a tenant or a self-service user, can log on, create a subscription, and get an offer, and create VMs with that offer. Okay? One interesting concept that I also want to go into before the demo is the way the identity really flows through the entire stack. Now, I, as a tenant, I log on to the portal and I have an identity. When I sign up for a plan, a subscription is created for me, which is my unique identity that gives me access to resources. Now, when I create the subscription, what happens within the system is that the quotas, actions, limits, and permissions, they flow down into the different resource providers. Now, one of our resource providers is SPF, which offers us IaaS, and SPF comes to know what the particular quota or restrictions are around that particular subscription. Within SPF, we have tenants that are created that recognize are parallel to the subscription, and all the way down in VMM, we have the tenant admin user roles that map to the tenants and then map up to the subscription. So the identity flows all the way down through the tiers. With that, I'll quickly switch to the demo and show you steps 4, 5, and 6. So let me switch to that. Awesome. OK. So I have the Windows Azure Pack deployment. Oh, a second. OK, great. We're in business. So this is the service administrator portal. So here you'll notice that we have website clouds, VM clouds, service bus, SQL, MySQL, automation extensions, plans, and user accounts. And this is how I create and maintain my infrastructure. And the second kind of portal that we have is the tenant portal. And this really is for the self-service user. They come in, they sign up, and they have access to resources now. So now I'm going to play admin first, and I'm going to add SPF into the system. So we have VM clouds. So now I'm going to go and register the System Center SPF provider. Chung had created an SPF endpoint for us and had configured the user account, so I'm going to go plug that in there. So we have SM SPF demo, and then it is deployed on port 8090. And we have SPF user. This is our secret password, and that should do it for us. So this is an operation in which what is happening right now is a trigger has been sent to the Service Management API to go find SPF and then register it within the system. So let's wait for it to happen. And once that happens, you'll see the portal refresh, and it'll then show you the other capabilities and other actions that the admin can do via SPF. Okay. Let's quickly switch to the other tabs that we have in this system. Okay. Oh, okay. Yes, we're in business. So now the portal refreshes because it recognizes SPF, and it's a valid identity, so it plugs it back. Awesome. So now it allows you to do different actions that are available via SPF. Now the first thing that we're going to do is go in and add a cloud provider, connect to it. So we have the VMM machine, so we need to go plug that in there. Okay, register. So via this registration process, what it's really doing is via SPF, it's going and it's recognizing the VMM provider that is associated with it. This will then allow us to talk directly to the VMM provider via SPF and get the clouds and the other infrastructure components that we will be talking to for creation and maintaining of VMs. Okay, woohoo. So we have this. So now we can see that the provider is registered, and we have the cloud that Chung added earlier for us. So we have the TechEd Europe cloud. Okay, now one interesting thing here is that this cloud was newly added. This was not there before, and that you can see very clearly because no resources have been created against this, and so the usage around this cloud is 0 right now. Okay, now that we have our cloud, what we can do now is add this VM provider or VM clouds into a plan and offer that to the self-service user. So let's go do that. Let's create a new plan and create a plan. And we can call it our VM plan. So we add the virtual machine clouds provider. Next, we don't need any add-ons right now. We'll keep it simple. And now we're creating a plan. Now the plan, as I mentioned to you just a little bit before, is really just a template. What it does is it's going to create a plan and then give us the opportunity to then go in and set permissions, quotas, and limits on this plan so that when a tenant then accesses that plan, they get a subscription, which is an instance of that plan. So right now we have a template, so we can go in. Here it shows you that one or more of the services that are part of this plan are not yet configured. So now we have to go and configure the VM clouds provider, which we just added. Okay. Cool. So now, what does it mean to configure the VM clouds provider? First, we choose the provider that we have as part of our system. So we choose that. And this data actually comes directly from VMM via SPF. Now that we've chosen a provider, it allows us to choose the cloud within that provider. If you had multiple clouds, it'll give you a list of these clouds, and then you can pick one that you want for this particular plan. Here we have only one cloud at this point, the one that Chung just added for us. So we choose that. And then if you scroll down this, you'll see that there are a lot of quotas and limits that you can set. Now this is our awesome plan, so we set everything to unlimited. We go down. So let's add some hardware profiles and templates to this. So we have some hardware profiles that got added. Let's pick those. And we have templates. Awesome. Okay. Now you'll see here that there are certain other settings that you can use as part of the plan. We're going to keep our plan pretty simple, but when you're configuring this, you can go and add additional features, and you can then hit save. This will now configure our plan. And that is done. So if we go back up this, we see that we now have a configured plan. Now, one thing for you to notice here is that this plan currently is private. What that means is I, as an admin, can sign up users to this plan on my side, but a self-service subscriber or tenant cannot sign up for it because they actually cannot see it because it's private. Now, to allow that to happen and for them to see it publicly, I have to change the state of this plan. And I say, yes, let's make that public. And now this is available for sign up. So having done that, I'm going to stop being an admin, and I'm going to switch over and be a tenant for a while. So this is the tenant portal. And let us sign up for a new account. So I'm going to use me at live.com and choose an extremely secure password. Okay. I'm going to refresh that. Okay, the smiley faces are here. Good. So what this is doing right now is it's actually creating a user identity within the ASP.NET membership provider, which is what we've configured by default. And so it's going ahead and creating my account in the membership provider database.
In addition to that, right, we'll also, when you're talking about how the subscription are being, how the user account being created from the Windows Azure Pack to SPF to VMM, right? Accordingly, there will be account being set.
That happens when we essentially start going down the subscription path. Yes, yeah. That's a good point. I'll bring that up. So at this point, it's really just creating an account within the Service Management API tier. Ooh, that is taking time. We apologize for this. It's just a demo environment.
Yeah, this actually is a demo environment for all three virtual machines, VMM, SPF, and Windows Azure Pack running on a single physical box. So if we can do that, you can do that as well, right? Fairly, we're stretching the limit a little bit, but for the demo purpose, it works. Just a little bit slow. And we're also going through Atlantic all the way back to Redmond.
Yeah.
This machine is in Redmond campus.
Okay. So what I'm going to do next after this is really, once I have my user account, I have the ability to go and create a subscription. And I can then get a subscription to the plan that I just created, which gives me access to create VMs on the cloud provider. Woohoo! So I'm not going to take the tour. I've done this a couple of times. So now we have a user account. You can see that I'm logged in as me. And now what I really have at this point is only just an account. I don't really have the ability to create or maintain any resources. So I go into New, and then I say My Account, and I add a subscription. Now, since we made the particular plan that we just created public, we can sign up for that. So I'm going to go ahead and sign up for a plan. What is happening now is it's really creating a subscription which goes through all the way from the Windows Azure Pack tier, and it goes via SPF. And what it does is it fans out the quotas and limits and the other permission information all the way down to the different research providers. Okay, we'll give that just a second.
So what does the Windows Azure Pack doing right now is talking through SPF, submitting the request to VMM as well, and the VMM layer will be creating a self-service user. And then as SPF layer, they also need to register the same user. So when this tenant or the self-user register will come back again, submitting any request, the request will be tracked based on that unique subscription ID that will be made aware even at the VMM layer as well.
So one really interesting thing for you to notice here is that before we had all items and we had my account, but now since we've signed up for the subscription, we actually have access to the cloud providers. So I'm going to go in here, and I right now have nothing. And I'm going to create a VM on the cloud that is a part of this particular plan. So the subscription allows me to do that. I'm going to create a standalone virtual machine from Gallery. This is a very interesting concept in which we have a set of different VMs that you can create from VHDs or templates. And this allows us to then go ahead, pick a particular VHD. For now, I'm going to pick the Windows Server 2012 R2, the newest version of the OS that we have, data center, and I'm going to go provision that. I'm going to give this VM a name, so demo VM 1. And then I'm going to pick one of the two that I had, so the small VM, and say OK. So now this will then go ahead and via SPF make a call into VMM to create this particular VM. And there you can actually see the job that has been triggered to do this. There you go. Woohoo! Now that's actually going to go through multiple stages of VM creation, which takes some time. So we can leave that there. I can hand it back to Chung, and then we can come back and check on this in a while. And you can see the same status on the Windows Azure Pack, which is a long-running process. And you'll see that come back once the VM is ready. Okay.
Thank you, Vaibhava.
Absolutely.
So I'm not sure if you noticed when Vaibhava was showing how to create a new VM, she went to the custom gallery creation and select a bunch of resources, right? Those resources doesn't exist on Windows Azure Pack. Those resources are all resources hosted by VMM, by the Fabric controller. And those resources are the resources you put into the VMM library, because part of the cloud, actually I think I missed one part during my demo, I'm going to show you it right now, which is to assign resources to a particular cloud, right? Once you do that, when Windows Azure Pack pull up information from SPF, those resources will show up as available resource for self-service user or tenant user to use. And actually, let me just switch back quickly to a VMM console. I can show you the cloud. I think I missed that part. The cloud is actually, you go to the VM and services and go into the cloud node, right? And this is the cloud that I created. It's called TechEd Europe Cloud. And we can take a look at the property of the cloud. So the property of the cloud contains essentially the key things are the resources. What are the compute resources you want to put into the cloud? What are the logical network? These are the things that we created in the demo, right? And the library is also important. In this case, for this demo, I'm only just using the default library server. But in your production environment, right, regardless of the enterprise environment or hosters environment, you may have multiple library servers, right? According to different user targeted audience, you may have a different library set of resources for different customers. So you may pick more than one or the specific library server for a specific target cloud. So yeah, that's the cloud. That's how you would create a cloud. All right, so let me switch back to the deck. And once the VM is done, then we can also show you the result of the VM creation. So hopefully, by now, right, the key takeaway we want you to hopefully to take away when you go back to your company, go back to your colleagues, the thing that you learned throughout the session are, number one, Microsoft's multi-tenant private cloud solution is composed of 3 products. That's the bare minimum you need to create the IaaS stack. Right? VMM at the bottom as the fabric controller. SPF layer provides the OData RESTful API. And Windows Azure Pack offers both the API layer as well as the portal experience for customer. And the second thing hopefully you'll take away is it's not that complicated, right? It's only 6 stages or 6 steps, and it doesn't take us more than 1 hour to set it up in a simple environment. So regardless if you want to go back and do a small setup testing or sandbox environment, or you want to roll out to production, it shouldn't take you very long to set it up. So hopefully we've provided you the information you need to be able to try it out. Go download our R2 preview release and try it out in your environment. As I was mentioning before, we really have this whole thing set up using one single physical box with 3 VMs. 1 VM for VMN, 1 VM for SPF, 1 VM for Windows Azure Pack. So go back and try it out and let us know how it goes. Now hopefully, with all the information now you learned through the session, instead of saying that, right, you can all go back and impress your teammates, impress your management. Hopefully this is useful. These are some related sessions that's related to the topic we talk about today. Some sessions for VMM, some sessions for SPF, some of the sessions for Windows Azure Pack. Please do look them up and get yourself familiar with the all-up Microsoft Private Cloud solutions. I think with that, we can open up for questions. We have about 7 minutes left. Also, let me switch back to the demo. While the VM is being copied over, we can answer some questions. Any questions? Yes. Can't really hear you. Sorry.
Can you check on the microphone?
Yeah.
Oh,
okay. Can you connect these kind of packs to payment services like PayPal or credit card services, so that the whole process of billing is automated?
Payment services for Windows Azure Pack.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Can you connect the Azure Pack to PayPal or credit card companies or that kind of payment services, so you can completely automate the billing and the creation of virtual machines?
Okay, so from a billing perspective, what we do offer as part of the Windows Azure Pack is a couple of things. There was actually a session yesterday that I talked about this a little bit more in detail, so I'll give you a reference to that. But at high level, what we have in the Windows Azure Pack is a usage service which really goes across the different providers and grabs real-time usage information of all resources, ties it back to a particular subscription and a user account, and provides that information for billing. So we have a pipeline with APIs, very consistent APIs, that give you data across the different providers. We also have that API give you details about plans, the subscriptions, add-ons information, all of that. We also are releasing something called service reporting, which is essentially it is a data warehousing capability in which it really plugs into these billing APIs, grabs the data, builds cubes, so you could do analytics on top of that as well, and then view trends and things like that. So absolutely. We provide that sort of API for you to plug in to your billing provider of choice. There are certain partners who are working with us to try to enable this as well. But we haven't really worked with PayPal necessarily, but there are some people who are working on it, and I can give you details afterwards. Oh, can you pass the mic? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Does each stamp under SPF have to be in the same domain, or can they be in separate Active Directories?
The question is, does each stamp under SPF have to be in the same domain?
No, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. The key thing is the SPF needs to have access to the VMM stamp, right? So your domain, the SPF service account, in our case is Redmond/SPF SVC, that domain account has to have access to the VMM stamp. And it also needs to be added as the admin in the VMM stamp. So it can't go across domain, but you have to make sure that that specific user, right, the SPF user account has to have admin access to the VMM stamps. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, so the user is completely disassociated from the stamp. There's no, if a user goes to get a VM or to enroll into the Azure pack, it's independent of each Active Directory.
The user needs to be authenticated in that domain where VMM stamp is, right?
So they can't have a VM in a domain that they're not in.
It doesn't have to be in the same domain, but that username has to be authenticated by that domain, right? You could have two-way trust domain setup.
Right. Okay.
Right. Okay. So the question is the forest the boundary or not? I don't believe so. I don't believe forest is the boundary. The key thing here is the trust boundary. You could have trust set up even across the forest. Yeah. So the key thing is as long as the SPF user can be authenticated, being the VMM admin, you should be fine. Yes, it is Kerberos-based. That is correct. Okay.
We had a question?
Yep.
Yes, hello, I'm Seppo from Finland. I have a question about licensing.
Okay.
As a service provider, what kind of licenses I need to run this, or where to look information about that?
So all system, also the question is about licensing. All System Center products comes under one license. If you get the one license for System Center product suite, you get access to all products. SPF is licensed under System Center suite. So you get it, if you have license to System Center products, you should have access to SPF as well. Windows Azure Pack is a free download though. Yeah, Windows Azure Pack is free download. You can get it from the website. There's no license attached to that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, no worries.
Can you turn that on? Can you please repeat the question?
If there's any way to get support for the Azure Pack?
Oh, way to get support for Windows Azure Pack.
Or is it self-service or self-support?
Well, right now we've released the preview as of this week. The RTM version of it, which will come out soon, will be supported absolutely. As part of normal Microsoft support channels.
Oh, the PSS.
Okay.
Also, there's one this week. Yeah, but it takes time to come back.
Just be aware, all these R2 products has not been official RTM released yet. The release date will be end of this year, right? So that should be aware of that. Before everyone goes out of the room, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Again, appreciate that you spend this afternoon here with us. Hopefully you've learned something that's helpful to you feel free to either send us email or stay off after this session. We'll be happy to answer more questions. Thank you. And have a good weekend.